Welcome back to Make More Love. In this show, we share real strategies that help high-performing men build passionate, intimate relationships and live fulfilling lives. I'm your host, Ellen Dorian. I'm both a relationship coach and a business coach, so I know how to handle all the crap that comes up when you're working to be the best at everything. Today's episode is a perfect segue from our series on happiness in relationships into the next big topic we're going to cover, which is about money, values, and how they shape our partnerships in ways we don't always realize. I have a special guest today, Manny Wolfe. Manny is a speaker, author, communications expert, and coach. He was born into a cult. He struggled with addiction and spent years trying to find solid ground. Today, he channels those lived experiences into powerful insights on identity, connection, and personal growth. His book, The Tao of the Unbreakable Man, is part raw autobiography, part deep reflection, and it's one of the most unflinching self-examinations I've ever read. This is going to be one of those conversations that leans a little toward the cerebral. There's some big thinking and deep reflection here, but it's still raw, real, and grounded in lived experiences. It's the kind of thing you'll feel as much as you think about it. As always in my interviews, we cover a ton. And so as usual, I'm bringing you this interview in two parts. In part one today, you'll hear us talk about trauma, attachment, and how the stories we absorb early in life shape the way we love. And then next week, in part two, we're going to dig into the messy intersection of money, marriage, and meaning, and what happens when emotions and unconscious beliefs around money collide. So let's get into it. Well, hi, Manny Wolfe.
Hi.
I'm so excited to talk with you. And so where are you right now?
I'm in my office in Auburn, California. It's 90 minutes straight down from Lake Tahoe.
Oh, very nice. I've flown into Lake Tahoe, and that is a beautiful flight in.
Yeah, it's like the beauty is almost too much to bear.
I understand. You and I have known each other for quite a few years now. Right?
Pre-COVID.
Pre-COVID first. Yeah. Oh, yeah, pre-COVID
so probably
for
like
sure.
2018.
And yeah, that sounds about right. And the funny thing about this is we knew each other for about 10 minutes, right? That's it. That's all of the face-to-face interaction we've ever had, but we have stayed connected ever since.
Yeah.
Right? On some energetic affinity level. I talk about affinity in my relationship hierarchy of needs. And you and I have had an affinity for a long time. And it's interesting because we don't talk every day. We don't talk even every year, I'd say. But we somehow keep finding reasons to be connected.
Absolutely.
So what prompted me to reach out to you is you made a post maybe a week back about how financial issues and financial troubles corresponded to relationship issues and troubles.
Yeah. It was not meant to be a broad and general kind of insight. It was more a thing of finally realizing, at least grasping an idea of what might have had its hand on the wheel through so many of the, we tend to live the same relationship over and over again. And for me, it's so predictable. It's like it's following a script. But I get a little smarter each time and a little more insightful each time. And hopefully I've unearthed the thing that has been at work all along. And so I say that to say that I know the post you're talking about, and it was meant to very much just be a reflection of my situation. Although I do think there's enough pattern similarity with the avoidant and the anxious people coming together like puzzle pieces that there's probably a lot of ways that other people might find truth for themselves in this thing.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and whether it's directly correlated or not, one of the biggest issues almost all couples have are financial differences.
Yeah.
Right? Differences in financial philosophy.
It's money, sex, and communication. Those are the three. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually this year in my podcast, I've been doing themes. And I'm just transitioning away from my series on happiness, and I'm about to go into one about finances and financial issues. And so your post is a perfect segue. So I thought, you know what? This is the perfect time
Yeah.
to talk with Manny. So would you share with me more specifics about how you came to this realization and what that means for you?
Yeah. So it's sort of hard to talk about that without at least a little peek into the backstory. At this point in my career and my evolution, I always feel so funny bringing up my backstory because that's what everybody does. But I was actually born in a cult, and I was actually brainwashed, and I actually have to process and deal with trauma. And the reason I use actually all the time is because the word trauma and the definition of trauma has been totally co-opted. If you stub your toe or you don't get the right drink at Starbucks, that's just not trauma, you guys. And you just need to toughen up if that's what you think trauma is. Trauma lives in your limbic system. Think of PTSD, right? Trauma is, well, there's the moment it happens, or in my case, the extended period of time where it happens. And then there's the way that it comes back on you. And what it does in your limbic system is it looks for the tiniest signals to trigger fight, flight, freeze, that whole thing. And really in a way that the real stuff, in a way that is often very difficult to detect. Imagine you're riding go-karts and you've got the little bumper walls, right? That's what kind of trauma does, is it sets those little walls, and it makes it very difficult to do anything but go through what starts to feel like a pre-established course. That's a fancy way of saying if you've struggled with relationships in particular and you ask yourself, why does this keep happening?
Yeah.
Aha. And so it's this weird thing where you know it's a part of you, but it's very hard to toggle out so that you can get the whole picture. It's very hard not to live right in it. And so the twin negative influences in my life was a clear-cut case of abandonment by my mother. Again, I was raised in a cult. And one of the hallmarks of people who will join cults is, on some level, they make an unconscious agreement to regress back to about an emotional comprehension level of a teenager. And this, by the way, guys, this is not me being judgmental or calling names. This is well documented. And so you regress a little bit so that you can have the experience of whoever the cult leader is being the parent.
Yes.
And
well, you'd have to, wouldn't you?
You have to.
In order to accept
right.
that.
And so there's this mutually agreed upon contortion of reality that happens. And cults would be the most extreme manifestation. But interestingly, we see less extreme manifestations of this all throughout human dynamics and relationship dynamics. I was raised by 40 or 50 people that were grown-ups behaving like teenagers. Right. And so all of this stuff that I'm saying is not pop psychology cliches. This is stuff I had to learn the hard way to figure out why the hell my life kept unfolding the way it did. Up until I was about 9 years old, and all kids have this, we have very clear pathways through which we can get approval from our parents. Now, all you have to do as a parent to keep a healthy, energetic connection to your child is get it right 3 out of 10 times. And in the case of my mom, it was like maybe 1 out of 20, perhaps 1 out of 50. I know it wasn't a malicious, but at the same time, I have to balance that against it still screwed me up. There's still damage here. And that showed up in being attracted to women who had the equal but opposite thing to me. And the equal but opposite thing to what I had is the avoidant behavior, avoidant connection. And so I would find myself in every meaningful commitment that I had ever made to a woman, getting to a certain point where it was, you kept telling me to trust you. Little by little, I trusted you. Here I am standing naked in the center of the arena and you're gone. And it was over and over and over again. And then that post was because that's where I'm at now. Well, no, I'm now coming through it And if I'm perfectly candid, I don't know what will happen with the marriage, but I'm no longer stuck in that loop. Now we've come to what you liked about that post. The other thing I was indoctrinated into was an extremely hyperbolic version of money is the root of all evil. The whole cult that I was raised in was quasi-communist and quasi-Marxist and quasi-socialist. It was borrowing freely from all of them. And one of the absolute tent pole in the ground ideas was money is evil. But they elevated that rhetoric to money is the tool the devil is using to destroy the world. The dominant impression I took away from all the hyperbole and the rhetoric and the propaganda about money was that it'll kill me. But so I figured out at some point how to make money. Always struggled to keep it. That was always very difficult for me. And it wasn't because I would spend it as fast as I got it, which is sort of the cliche, right? I remember the first time I sold somebody a service package for $25,000. And it was just a high watermark for me, a high moment. And without realizing it, I totally took my foot off the gas after that. And this is something that is super common, but it's very hard to detect. You know, this idea of taking your foot off the gas when you're doing well financially. I did this as a drug dealer back in my teens and my 20s. Then I got sober and went through a lot of hit and miss stuff with work. Had a head full of all these ideas that were the opposite of who I am. You know, my siblings all have outrageously high-level gifts musically in most cases. One of the themes in my family is this like underutilized life idea. You know, every single one of my siblings and me, if I'd be so bold as to say, we showed exceptional aptitude in something, all of us. My sister could have been a world-class musician. One of my brothers has passed away. He had just incomprehensible skill with set design, and he was just amazing. And my youngest brother is super gifted in music as well, and none of them have actualized themselves at all. And then, of course, judged me for wanting to actualize myself, wanting to see how far I could take it. But and so when I wanted more, when I wanted to figure out money, they were not able to give accurate feedback. And so at a certain point, I started doing construction, and I immediately got licensed and became my own contractor, and had many years where I made a lot of money. I thought at the time that it was just because the work was hard, which it is. It's very, very difficult.
Very hard work. Yeah.
And there's a lot of it, and it's long hours. And anyway, so my finances would go like this, but as they peaked, they'd peak very high. And I could never figure out why I couldn't sustain it. And now we come to that post, right? I would always look at the emotional stuff. If I had a problem with money, my mind would automatically snap to, well, what's the emotional, psychological, spiritual dimension to this? And I think that's pretty common. You can see it all over social media with like energetic money coaches and all of this largely nonsense, you know.
Largely nonsense, yes. Yes.
You know, there is a certain point where you've got to figure out your triggers. You got to figure out some things. But it's very hard to discern where the line is where you need to stop looking at your belly button to get answers to the questions and just get out in the world. And I'd evaluate from the spiritual, energetic, emotional, psychological level, which was the wrong thing to be doing. Because that is taking your foot off the gas. Right?
So can you explain that a little bit more? Because I'm sure everyone will relate to the feeling, but I'm not sure everyone understands what you mean when you say energetic and spiritual level with respect to money.
So partly I think I'm just wired to look at human behavior and dissect it and look for answers to why we do what we do from these levels of perception. And that's the rhetoric I was raised in. So in other words, instead of going, why aren't I just getting up at 8 every morning and doing estimates? And then when I'm done it with estimates, why aren't I just calling the people that'll do the door hanger drops for me so that the neighborhoods I'm painting houses in all have door hangers? That's the question I should have been asking. But the question I start exploring is, well, where in my childhood was I taught the thing that makes the thing do the thing, and on and on and on? And there's no bottom to those kind of questions. And that's why I call it spiritual navel gazing, because it'll keep you there as long as you're willing to stay there. And so one of the things that actually helped me was to start imagining this abandonment wound as a gremlin, and then imagining the money stuff as a gremlin. It sounds silly, but it really helped me to personify the two of them.
Yes.
And so now I've got this way to look at these things that I know are problems for me. One gremlin in my belly and another gremlin in my belly, and all they want to do is undercut me, right? They're just there to sabotage me. And so I guess what I mean is your real world concrete problems that you might be having, whether it's in your relationship or with your money, and money will absolutely affect your relationship 100%. There's a time and a place for examining them as though they were spiritual issues, energetic issues, karmic issues, these kind of things. And there's a time and a place for just knocking that crap off, and shouldering up under the burden and doing the work. That's the part I wish I knew 30 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever.
Sure.
And so if I'm being really honest, my wife and I came together out of necessity. We needed what the other one had. And we did develop into love, and it was really very profound and special for me. However, I overlooked a lot of red flags, as did she, by the way. This is not a one-sided thing. The only difference might have been that I'm more versed in that kind of thing. I know that kind of world better than she did. But I also am a firm believer that in relationships, you come equally matched. And first of all, that's something that people struggle to wrap their heads around. And then there's a misinterpretation of what that means. And so evenly matched doesn't mean you both had abandonment wounds. Evenly matched means your puzzle pieces fit together.
Yeah.
Right? It's like the yin and the yang. Yeah. And that's why it's so psychologically textbook that the avoidant person attracts the anxious person. And so let's oversimplify and say if your level of avoidance is here and the person you meet's level of anxiousness is here, you're going to fit together really well.
Yes.
In my, I want to say early 40s, perhaps late 30s, I got to work with this phenomenal therapist. I mean, she was a gift. She was the one that introduced me to that idea. And she also said to me, among other things, that people misunderstand the purpose of long-term committed relationships. She said they're containers for growth. And you really need to look at them that way, because that'll give you a perspective for when the hard things happen. I was never the kind of person that could say all women are crazy or all men are chauvinists, or you can't be monolithic with groups like that, right? None of those things are true. They're easy, convenient cop-outs. And so I know that coming into a relationship, you're going to come up against your challenges. And thanks to that therapist I got to work with, I now believe that's what it's for. It's an avenue for growth that would not be available to you if you were on your own. So when these problems started coming in the relationship, to me, it was like, well, we've been together, I guess, 13 years now. And it makes sense to me because we love each other and there's a lot of trust there, that's the kind of environment where it's hopefully safe for your deeper stuff to bubble to the surface and be addressed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I get that. I've been through that myself because I've been married and divorced and remarried. And my first husband was an alcoholic. And I probably knew that.
On some level, right?
Yeah, he was from Finland, and Finns are known for this, right? And And they are. I've been to Helsinki 14 times, and I can really see how much a part of the culture drinking
Right.
is, and how people kind of got their way through the week just to get to the weekend so that they can
Sure.
get away.
Yeah.
And then when I ended up getting divorced and I met my second husband who didn't drink at all,
Hmm.
that was very appealing to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I thought, oh, I couldn't be getting together with someone more different
Mhm.
than my ex-husband. And my husband is amazing and he is 100% different. But there are undeniable similarities too. They're both engineers and have that logical, analytical, and sometimes exasperatingly literal way of thinking. They're both on the more introverted side, and they have similar attitudes toward family gatherings and socializing.
Yeah.
And I find that fascinating because I thought I'm getting someone who's exactly the opposite. And yet,
Which is about par for the course as far as I can tell, you know.
yeah.
I've adopted this point of view that I'm here to work, and not because it sounds cool, but
Mhm.
because it's the only perspective that allows me to make sense of my life to this point. You know,
Mhm.
growing up in the commune, there was a lot of talk about, well, the soul decides what its purpose here is on earth before it comes in. Oh, that's new agey, hippy dippy kind of stuff. And I don't think that's all wrong. A lot of the things that they would talk about wound up being accurate in a certain way, but there was never any sort of self accountability or anything like that. And so it shaded that for me, but that certain lives have themes to them that just tracks for me and it helps me to make sense of things.
Mhm.
But the other side of it is that there's a certain amount of abdication of responsibility when you start talking about things like your soul compact before you came into this body and all that stuff. It's like blaming your parents for your behavior. It's not to be dismissed out of hand, but it's easy to use that as a justification for not taking responsibility.
Absolutely. That's a common theme for people who believe in
Right.
predeterminism,
Yeah.
right? And how does that intersect with free will,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And that's a big philosophical
Right.
discussion, one that I certainly grew up in my easygoing Christian
Yeah.
upbringing, so and so many people believe that everything was already determined. God has
Well,
already
that's
determined how you
convenient.
will be from yes, and so then you don't have to do
Right.
anything, and no mistake you make is ever a mistake
Not
because
really. Yeah.
God doesn't make mistakes,
Yeah.
right? So it must be for a
Right.
reason, and
Yeah.
on you go,
Yeah.
right? I grew up with a lot of that.
And in the new age transformational community, they call that spiritual bypassing. That's
Mhm.
what that is. And so for me, whatever the reason, I'm about taking responsibility for myself. And I think
Mhm.
honestly, it comes from living the first 28 years of my life taking no responsibility for my actions. You know, my drugs and crime and destitution and running with criminals and all that stuff up to 28 ended in such a dark place that when I made a change to sobriety, they talk when you get into the 12-step program about clinging to it like a drowning man clings to a life preserver. And I did.
Mhm.
No one can ever take that from me. I clung to it like a motherfucker. I was like, you want me to call it
Mhm.
God? I'll call it God. You want me to call it big fuzzy carrot? I don't care. None of that matters to
Mhm.
me. What matters is I
Mhm.
sense that there are tools here that can help me not be that anymore.
Yeah. We should talk about your amazing book because I've been
Sure.
reading The Tao of the Unbreakable Man. So I am very familiar with your story. I'm about 60% of the way through it, so I don't know how it ends. But everything that you've been talking about is so well documented in your book. And I
Yeah.
do find it surprising that you say that you took no responsibility because one of the themes in the book is this underlying moral man.
Well,
And I,
I didn't
so that,
realize that though until after being sober, right?
I see.
Yeah. And
Okay.
so,
Yeah.
so, and I
Okay.
did have that experience. So one of the themes in the book is the idea of this moral man that was trapped inside me. And what I meant by that was through all the terrible things I did, and I did plenty of just shockingly stupid and bad and inconsiderate things, primarily around like putting my life at risk for no reason, sleeping with my friends' girlfriends indiscriminately, And it's so weird to even say that one now with perspective, but the reality is I was taught that monogamy was bullshit. I was taught that there was no reason not to share yourself with anybody who wanted it. And I did. I did that. And I hurt my friends from doing that. And part of me was watching and going, what are you doing? But it just had no agency. That part of me had no agency. And that was the moral man, you know?
Well, I will say I have my doubts about monogamy too.
I'm starting to think maybe there's a conversation there as well, but I don't know yet. Yeah.
Yes. I believe in ethical non-monogamy, which means if your friends weren't consenting, then it's not okay.
Right.
But I do believe that there are open marriages and alternative relationship styles that work beautifully for people. If everyone understands what they are, practices, does the work, as you say, and continues to communicate. And you need to be damn good at it. It's PhD level communication.
Yeah, for sure.
To have more than one healthy relationship going at a time. That's an extraordinary thing. And most people can't do that even reasonably well a lot of the time. So to be fair, I do think that monogamy is a great institution for many, many people, but not for everyone.
I agree.
So,
I mean, just from the simple perspective that everybody's a little different. And there's getting close to 8 billion of us. So that's 8 billion, at least slightly different points of view and frames of reference. And so it stands to reason that it wouldn't fit for everyone. And I totally have no problem with that. But not telling anybody first and running around in secrecy, that was what I did. And it wasn't even that. It was just, I just didn't give it a thought.
Well, you weren't raised.
I was not raised to give it a thought. That's right.
Yes. And that's where everything comes from in terms of relationship. Everything comes from the way we're
Could not
raised.
agree more.
Right.
That is an important.
Yes.
That'd be one of those things where if I was to say, if you take one thing from this conversation, that might be it. Yeah. Because you cannot overstate how much what you're exposed to and the way you interpret it in your youth goes on to affect you. I think nature and nurture play a role, but for sure, nurture plays a role. For sure. Yeah.
Sure. Well, and the nurture in a lot of cases is counterintuitive to the nature.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If we're looking at it that way. But one of the reasons that I do this, what I do on the relationship coaching side, is because I believe that as evolved human beings, we need models for relationships that just don't exist.
Yeah.
Everything we learn about relationships is based on the fairy tales we hear growing up, adolescent fantasies about the man of our dreams or the woman of our dreams, and then what we see our family and friends doing in their relationships.
Right.
And that's it. And they all just came from the same fairy tales and the fantasies. And so it's just self-perpetuating bullshit. And there's not a good model for relationships. There's no understanding of what it takes to make one and to keep one and to accommodate the changing of human beings throughout time. Right. In order to keep that together. So that is one of the main reasons that I do this work. And we're going to continue this conversation with Manny in a minute. But first, I want to share something many of you have been asking about. A lot of you have been asking what happens when you work with me. Let me break that down for you. We don't just sit around talking, and I don't just dish out advice. I work from a place of logic and strategies and solutions because I believe the same strategies that solve business problems can be applied to relationships. So you and I will team up to get a clear picture of what's really going on in your relationship. Then we'll pinpoint the top priorities to work on. We lay out a strategic plan to target the things that will actually make a difference. And then I'm right there with you, supporting you as circumstances change and helping you stay focused on what's important. You'll build new skills and strategies to get out of the rut and create the passionate partnership you crave. So if you're stuck in a loveless limbo, why would you want to stay there? Your first step out is easy. Set up a relationship reset call with me. It's free, it's quick, just 15 minutes, just you and me. You'll bring me up to speed. I'll let you know if I think I can help, and if not, I'll tell you that too. We'll work out 1 or 2 action steps to get you moving forward right away, and after that, if you want more help, I'll let you know how to get it. Let's be honest, you already know what's at stake here. If you let your relationship fall apart, the cost to your financial, social, and emotional well-being is ginormous. It's going to leave a permanent dent in your armor. So let's not let that happen. Head over to relationshipresetcall.com and grab a spot. Let's get you back on track to make more love in your life and with your wife. And we're back to our conversation with Manny. And just before the break, I was saying that one of the main reasons I do this work is because I believe we need new models for relationships that actually work for the way human beings grow and change over time.
I think that that's spot on. And before I forget, let me just close the loop on that Facebook post and the main idea of it. What I thought over this last 8 months or so was just a very extreme marriage problem, I have come to believe was much bigger than that, for me at least. Hopefully, potentially for her too. But I also recognize that here's another sort of relationship nugget for people. You can't change anyone. You can't force anyone to do anything unless it's actual force. And you don't want to be doing that, obviously. So the best you have is influence and inspiration. That's it. And so hopefully she's inspired and or influenced to dig in with her stuff, her side of the street, as we say in 12 steps. Mm-hmm. And so it's all coming to a head now. And so I have this weird thing where on the one hand, I want to support her and hold that container. And on the other hand, I kind of know 3 moves ahead. It's just a strange place to be. But the real thing that made me write that post was all through my life, when I'd have money problems, my mind would just like a rubber band snap to emotional stuff, relational stuff. And so in other words, it was like the money's on fire over here and I'm looking at the abandonment wound, right? Mm-hmm. And if I say it like that, hopefully you see how random that is and how bizarre that is. That's like if your left hand's on fire, putting your right hand in water.
Just a question on that. So is it that you think that your relationship was dependent on you having the money?
Well, we'll get to that. Because it gets really nuanced. It really gets slippery. Yeah. So the first thing was, and this just popped into my head. It was such a trip. What if this whole time the abandonment wound has been a red herring? What if that? And I just followed that down the garden path. And that's what led me to thinking, what if I thought of the money shit as a gremlin and the abandonment wound as a gremlin? And what if the gremlin about money just kept saying, it's not me, it's him? And what if I kept falling for it? Because I'm wired to look in that emotional, relational, energetic, spiritual place. And suddenly it was like a curtain parted. I was like, holy shit. You know what I mean? I was like, and forgive my ribald language here, but I was just like, motherfucker. It was like, it was one of those moments. And by the way, when you're figuring out these kind of deep things, I would also offer this. Do not look for right and wrong answers. Look for answers that provide utility. Right? We could look at a great example of this is the theory of relativity. It is now in the process of being proven incomplete, but it had high utility for solving problems. We always want to, especially with internal stuff and emotional stuff and relational stuff and personal problems, we always want yes and no, right and wrong binaries, and it's almost never the case. It's almost never the case.
Especially in relationships, right? Especially in
relationships. So what you need are idea models that have higher and lower utility to help you. That is the thing. Hopefully give you a whole new way to look at things. And that's what it did for me. And so this idea, I don't even care if it's right or wrong. It opens up all this utility for me with which I can work more deeply. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yes. It's a working theory.
Yeah.
It gives you an opportunity, right? Well, there's this cliche, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? Right? People use that all the time. And it's not an either or question. You can be right and still be happy. You can be wrong and still be happy. You can be right and be unhappy. That's like your left hand, right hand example.
Yeah. Well, we tend towards dogmatism. It's a part of human nature, especially things that have given us some kind of value or reward at some point. We just want to codify it in our minds and make it the absolute all the time truth. And it's just not how these things work.
To me, one of the great paradoxes of
Yeah.
humanity is that we are such extraordinarily complex human beings, always looking for the simplest solution to everything.
Right.
And expecting that to fit and expecting it to feel good when we land on the yes or no or the black and white. And it never feels good because we've got this internal universe that's saying,
right.
yeah, but not always
right.
and not everyone. And so we are never completely happy with the simple answer. But if we don't come up with some kind of answer,
Right.
then we get lost.
Right.
Right. So
A thought on wanting to rush to simplicity, that's sort of akin to what I would call premature enlightenment, right? It's not real enlightenment. It's the fake enlightenment of thinking you found the answer. And take sushi. Sushi is a perfect example of this. It took hundreds of years to get down to the perfect rice, the perfect fish, hundreds of years of very complex work to get to this thing that is now simple. So real simplicity has a massive tail behind it of complexity, right? Or to translate it into like thinking of relationships and stuff, you don't just get to some Zen level of acceptance. You work your way to some Zen level of acceptance through complexity. Reducing the complexity little by little by little leads you finally to that point. So, I'm.
And you know more about this than I do, but that is pretty much the idea behind Buddhism, right? Is that we reduce levels of complexity till we get to simplicity.
Yeah, except that is the idea. The idea is, well, there's so many different aphorisms from Buddhism. One of the ones I like the best is, before enlightenment, collect water from the river, chop wood. After enlightenment, collect water from the river, chop wood. I would give more credit to Eastern thought ideas to have led me here than Western. How about that? Yeah, that's a good, yeah.
Yes, fair enough. So that's where we're going to leave off our conversation with Manny for today. In part 2 next week, we're going to go even deeper. We're going to talk about the messy business of money and marriage and finding meaning in relationships over time. And we're going to talk about how those unconscious beliefs about money collide with that myth of the good provider. I can't wait to see where this conversation goes. If you're not already subscribed, you definitely want to do that this week, because you are not going to want to miss what we talk about next week. All right. I hope today's episode got you thinking, but we can only do so much in an open forum like this. If you want to look at your specific situation, book in that free relationship reset call. We'll figure out the next best move and set you on a path to a better relationship for both you and your partner. Again, you can just head over to relationshipresetcall.com and pick a time. You can also join our Passionate Partners Insider community on Facebook. There's exclusive content and resources there. Or visit our website or our social channels to learn more about our programs, workshops, and private coaching options. All the links to everything I mentioned, plus my personal email, are in the show notes. I'll be here whenever you're ready. Now, I've got a quick request. I'd really appreciate your help spreading the word about Make More Love. First, if you haven't done it already, hit follow or subscribe on your favorite platform. It helps more people find the show, and it also keeps you in the loop. Second, leaving a review would mean the world. It helps us grow our community and reach more people. And finally, if you know someone who is struggling in their relationship, then share the show with them. You might just change their life. Thank you so much for spreading the word. I believe you had good reasons for choosing your partner. My mission is to help you reconnect with those reasons and discover new ways to make more love in your life and with your wife. I'm Ellen Dorian, and that's what I've got for you today. 49 Endless Loops, when your relationship feels like Groundhog Day.